I walked out of gym class with wet hair and a lump in my throat, and then she did it. Rosie's sister called me pathetic in front of half the school, like she'd been waiting all day to stab me. Her scream cut across the hallway, sharp enough to make people stop and turn, and her friends laughed like it was a punchline. I held my breath and chewed my lip until it bled, tasting copper and shame, while she kept screaming, "You're such a fake, always copying me," like she was correcting me for bad homework instead of tearing me apart. I remember the exact look on her face, that smug tilt, the little curl at the end of her mouth, the way she fluffed her hair like it was a crown instead of just hair. People pointed. A couple of kids I barely knew smirked. My hands were shaking. I wanted to yell back, to tell her she was a bully, to call her out for making everything about her, but my throat closed up. I walked away like I always did after she performed for her audience, swallowed the lump, and told myself to breathe. That night I went to the corner pharmacy under streetlights that smelled like rain and fry oil, and I bought black dye like it was a weapon. I didn't think about the rumor mill or what my parents would say. I thought about hurting her in a place she didn't expect. By midnight my hair was black and ruined on purpose, patchy and clinging to my scalp in thick, angry clumps. It stung. The dye burned a little. I told myself it would be worth it when she saw me flinch. The next morning when she opened her locker and saw me, she widened her eyes like I'd performed a magic trick. "So that's your personality now?" she said, loud enough for the hallway to lean in. Her friends giggled. That smug voice, the one that had always treated me like a second-rate version of her, sounded almost proud. I felt something cold and clean settle in my chest. "You finally found a personality," she said, and smiled like she'd won. "Yeah," I said, and I let my voice be softer than normal on purpose, like a knife, because I wanted her to feel the quiet before everything got loud. "Yeah," she repeated and walked away, tossing a look over her shoulder as if to say case closed. That look lit a controlled fury inside me. I had no idea how fast I'd escalate, how deliberate I would get, but at that moment I decided I would make her life mirror mine until she couldn't pretend anymore. I started small the next day, but with intent. I failed a pop quiz on purpose, letting my teacher sigh and shove a paper into my hands with that disappointed look parents like to see. Rosie was the type that liked to be the fixer, so failing became my ticket to her presence. I watched her brow furrow when she found out. "I'll tutor you," she said, like it was both punishment and praise. I grinned inwardly because that was the plan. I wanted her to invest time and energy into me, to be the one everyone saw dragging me up, to be the one who took blame when things fell apart. Then I started the noise. I played music through the thin concrete between our bedrooms at 5:30 in the morning, full blast, nothing subtle, heavy drums, loud guitars, vocals that pulled at lungs. I timed it so she'd have to hear the beat through the wall on nights she needed sleep the most. I wanted her friends to think she was the one staying up, that she was flaky and loud, not the calm, put-together girl everyone expected. I wanted to fray her edges until she looked like what some people whispered about behind her back. I ate meat at breakfast like it was a statement, a small, petty rebellion in a house where she judged what everyone ate. I refused to smile at her friends, stared at my phone in the cafeteria, and contradicted her just to see people glance between us and wonder which story was true. At her birthday party, I tripped on purpose and sent the cake flying, plastering frosting on her face and her best friend's shirt. She sat stunned and enraged, mascara running, guests whispering, cameras clicking. "You're disgusting," she hissed later, mascara smudged and furious, and I only shrugged like it was an accident I couldn't control. When she finally begged me to stop, mascara streaked down her cheeks and voice cracking, "Please, I'll do anything, just stop." It felt like the end game started. I kept my face still like a judge, and I watched how her desperation looked under the fluorescent kitchen light. I needed a confession, and I needed to force her to feel what I felt every time she told me I was less. So I made her promise to undo it, to admit she was wrong, and I pushed the next step forward like someone turning a key in a locked door. I started failing tests on purpose, handing in blank pages and copying formulas wrong, because I wanted Rosie's sister to be dragged into my mess where everyone could see her sweat. Teachers called home like alarm bells, and mom, mother, and dad, father sat across from me with those disappointed faces adults use when they think teenagers are cheap puzzles. "We don't understand what's happening," Dad said, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose like he could fix the problem with a look. I shrugged and let the silence work for me, because every ring of the phone, every parent-teacher email, was a thread tying Rosie to me in front of authority. They made Rosie tutor me because she was top of her class and because it seemed logical to force the problem into her hands. She came over after school with notebooks stacked and a dog-eared patience I knew she practiced on her own mirror. "Okay, slow down," she said the first night, setting her planner like a baton on the table. "We'll start from the basics." She was all method and lists, the kind of person who could make a study schedule into a warm blanket. I took her calm and pulled at it, because I wanted her to look like she wasn't doing enough. During those sessions, I did the opposite of everything she taught. When she underlined key concepts, I highlighted entire paragraphs so nothing stood out, turning clarity into smog. When she showed me how to work out an equation, I copied the numbers backwards, then watched her correct me with a patience that looked more frustrated each time. "You're not even trying," she'd say, and she'd always sound like she wanted to believe me but couldn't. I pretended to misunderstand simple concepts that every kid in the room had already picked up. I asked the obvious questions, the ones that made her bite the inside of her cheek and count to 10. Sorry for the quick interruption. If you're enjoying this so far, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and leave comment below. It really helps the channel grow. Alright, let's jump back into the story. I wrote notes backward once, slanting letters like a mirror and laughing quietly at the look on her face when she tried to read my work. She would flip my paper, trace over the letters, and then look at me like I'd just handed her a riddle instead of a sibling. "This is useless," she muttered once, but she kept going because she felt responsible and because she had to prove she could fix anything. I relished the slow collapse of that proof, the way her shoulders lost some of their armor each day. When my grades kept sliding, Mom and Dad started blaming Rosie for being a terrible tutor, calling her methods into question as if the tools she used were weapons instead of help. They sat her down at the kitchen table and lectured her about responsibility like she was the one flunking algebra tests. "You need to take this seriously," Mom said, her voice shaking between care and anger. "You're setting an example." Rosie nodded, mascara faintly smudged from staying up late. Taking in every word like guilt was a lesson she could learn. I watched her through the doorway during those talks, feeling small and sharp at the same time. She sat under adult scrutiny like someone being measured for blame, and I let the scene play out. While she took responsibility, I played dumb in front of them like a puppet refusing to move, and I loved the performance because it showed how easy it was to shift attention. "He's not trying," Dad said finally, and I shrugged like a man who'd quit a job he never wanted in the first place. Parents tightened their schedules, rearranged weekend plans, and breathed heavy with worry as if fixing one child meant breaking another in the process. Rosie sat through lecture after lecture about being responsible, about stepping up for family, and about how her success was now a balancing act we all depended on. Her tutors became my scapegoats. "You let him do this," Mom accused quietly one evening, and Rosie took it like she was accepting a verdict. She started planning tutoring calendars, color-coded and meticulous, and she would set alarms on her phone to make sure we both kept the schedule. I watched the alarm go off and then watched her answer it with tired eyes, feeling a small, ugly triumph in each exhausted blink. I played the student who couldn't focus, who needed constant repeating, and I did it with a cruelty that felt justified. The meetings with teachers turned into sessions about parenting and supervision, where Rosie listened while I sat back and built my case through bad grades and blank pages. "We just want him to try," Mom would say, and Rosie would murmur, "I know," as if the confession was a punishment she deserved. I let her shoulder those words until they dulled into acceptance, because I wanted everyone to see how much she was willing to carry for me. But I wasn't content to stop at grades. The tutoring became a stage where I could test how far she would go, and she went far. She sacrificed sleep for calculus, social time for worksheets, and her weekends for my rewrites. I felt like I had her exactly where I wanted, visible, responsible, a target slowly wearing down under other people's expectations. That visibility made her brittle, exposed. And I kept pressing, laughing inwardly when the adults nodded at her as if she were the steady one while I, the supposed problem, became the pawn that proved how fragile their assumptions could be. I set the alarm for 5:30 and let it ring until it was a ritual. I hooked my phone to cheap speakers and blasted grinding metal until the house shook just enough to wake the pipes. I wanted to break the quiet she kept like a shield, so I picked songs that tore at sleep, screaming vocals, distorted guitars, drums like hammers. The wall between our bathrooms was paper-thin, and it became my instrument. I watched her playlists get replaced by noise I knew would make her flinch, and I listened for the small panic that came when someone's world was rearranged. The next morning she opened her bathroom door with hair still damp and eyes that begged for mercy, but I kept my volume up like a test. I could hear her stop brushing, hear the way she paused and then shuffled her feet. I imagined her playlists, all curated and safe, being pushed aside by the mess I forced through the wall. She would duck out of the bathroom and glance at me, mascara barely holding, and I'd say nothing. Silence was part of the punishment. Her friends used to stay over sometimes. After the noise started, sleepovers disappeared like lights being turned off. Girls who used to gossip and laugh in our living room started declining invites and coming up with excuses. They began to whisper. I heard snatches. "Demons next door, what's with his family?" The phrase spread like a stain. Rosie's sister had to explain herself to embarrassed, bewildered peers as if she'd been handed a problem she didn't make. She would stand in the hallway and say, "They're fine," or "It's just him being loud," and people would tilt their heads and try to make sense of a story they wanted neat. I watched her try to spin it into something manageable while I leaned back and let the rumors do the work I had started. Once she started seeing a guy named Jason boy she liked and tried to change little things she thought would matter. He was quiet and liked plant-based dinners, the kind of boy who smiled at campus gardens and said things like, "I care about animals." She stopped eating meat to impress him. She told me in a soft voice one afternoon, "I'm doing this for him," and there was a hope in her that I recognized and decided to crush because that hope was a luxury she didn't earn in my book. I wanted to expose that trying to be someone else never worked. So I ate meat like it was a message. I bought sausages and steaks and cooked them in the morning while she sat at the counter with her avocado toast and polite smile. I bit into blood-dripping meat with loud, deliberate chewing, and I watched as she flinched and turned her head away. It was petty and perfect. On nights when she invited Jason over, I made sure dinner smelled like a butcher shop. The way he left her house that first time, pale and holding his stomach, felt like a small victory. He later told people he thought her family was weird, and the rumor mill used that word like fuel. I remember standing outside the kitchen doorway as he walked away, his jacket shrugged up like someone shielding himself from cold and embarrassment. Rosie came to the door with trembling hands and said, "I don't know what to do," and I told her nothing because I wanted to see how she'd fall apart. In the days after, people asked her about the dinner like it was a scandal. "Is he okay?" classmates would say, eyes lowering. She tried to laugh it off at school, but the laugh sounded thin and shook. Her friends stared at her sometimes like they were waiting for the next odd thing to happen, like waiting for an animal to show its true colors. The gossip moved faster than I expected. Jason's comment about her family being weird jumped from one mouth to another until it sounded like fact. People adopted it because it fit a story they already liked. The perfect sister ruined by a messy household and a younger sibling who acted out. I sat in the cafeteria watching people nudge each other and point without looking at me, and it felt like winning because I had made their narrative wobble. They started avoiding the table where Rosie sat. She picked at food and gave short answers, and when she tried to explain, people would nod politely and move on. She began defending herself more, trying to show she wasn't defined by my chaos. "Stop," she would tell me once in the hallway, voice low and raw. "You're making it hard for me." I watched her try to rebuild things I had burned. I heard the quiet in her voice when she talked about Jason, like she was piecing together a broken plate and pretending the cracks didn't show. I kept pushing, and the more I pushed, the more the world looked at her and saw the fallout instead of the person she was. That was the point, to make everyone see the cost of comparing people and to force her into the light I'd dragged her into, whether she liked it or not. Her birthday was the moment I went for maximum public humiliation, like someone turning the dial to 11 and not stopping. I carried the cake into the backyard where half the school and a stack of parents circled, and I let my foot catch an invisible seam on purpose. I heard gasps and a slow, horrified laugh before gravity did the rest. The cake left my hands in a slow arc and smashed straight into Rosie's sister and her best friend, frosting painting their faces and hair like a stupid, sticky mask. Phones came out before I could even blink, everyone filming because humiliation is cheap entertainment when it's not your face on the screen. Someone shrieked, someone else laughed, and the worst sound was the camera clicks, like a dozen small judges deciding I won the moment. Rosie stood there dripping cake and mascara, hands half raised like she wasn't sure whether to wipe it off or throttle me. "You did this on purpose," she said, voice strangled with rage and something that sounded like hurt. I didn't say sorry, I let the silence be loud. People posted the clip within minutes and it crawled through feeds until it looped on everyone's phones like a bad ringtone. The clip had my stumble, the arc of the cake, her expression frozen in disbelief, her best friend blinking globs of frosting out of her eyelashes. Likes and comments piled on like traffic. The world loved the spectacle, and I had given them a show. After that, I turned my social media into a garbage collage. A public middle finger with pictures of roadkill and moldy leftovers, captioned with fake inspirational lines. I tagged Rosie's sister in everything like a brand of shame. I followed her friends and liked posts in a way that felt like chewing on someone else's life. People started unfollowing her in droves because guilt and association are contagious online. She'd glance at her phone and flinch like each notification was a new bruise. At home, I made sure I was useless in the worst possible way. Her study groups used to run in our kitchen while she spread notes and highlighters around, and I sat there mute and unhelpful like an actor in a horror show who refused to speak. I stared at the table and at the quiet between them until the guests felt the awkwardness and stopped coming over. One by one, invitations dwindled. Her best friends stopped stopping by. The table became smaller not because they wanted it that way, but because I made it so. When she finally confronted me in the hallway later that week, mascara smudged and voice raw, she said, "This is insane. Why are you doing this?" I looked at her and felt like a man holding a list that had been checked off, and I said, "Because you needed to be seen differently," like that explained everything. She laughed, the sound breaking like glass. "You're hurting me," she whispered, and I heard the word hit the floor between us like a dropped dish. Her friends stopped answering her texts. People at school started glancing away when she passed, as if she'd become something contagious. Teachers mentioned it like a weather report in the halls, and the rumor mill chewed everything I fed it into finer pieces. I watched her pick at a sandwich in the cafeteria and swallow hard, trying to keep steady while the world around her rearranged itself into a pattern where she looked unstable, and I looked like the problem that made her try harder. The worst was watching our parents circle with concern and confusion, trying to put out the visible fires while the invisible ones smoldered. Mother asked me once quietly and late, "What is going on?" And I could have lied and said I didn't know. Instead, I kept my mouth shut and let the silence hang over her like a verdict. Rosie sat across from us at dinner with the same tired eyes I'd seen every day, and she didn't say much except, "I can't keep doing this," as if the weight of everyone's expectations had finally started to crush her a little. If she said yes, I said no. If she introduced me, I acted like a stranger and watched people tilt their heads and wonder who I was. I learned how easy it was to flip every basic interaction into a tiny betrayal. In class, I would ignore her when she waved, stare straight ahead, and let her face fall while her friends shot puzzled looks. At parties, I pretended not to know her name, and people laughed politely, filling the silence with small talk that always felt like a bandage over something bleeding. It was petty, surgical, and I liked how it made her look less certain in front of everyone. Her boyfriend, Jason, boy she liked, started asking questions with a slow, crooked curiosity like he was testing a glass for cracks. "Is your family like okay?" he'd ask in a low voice when she handed him a plate, and she would blink because she was used to people assuming everything was fine. The doubt in his voice spread like mold. Teachers pulled her aside during lunch, looking worried in a way that made her feel like a problem needing fixing. "If your family can afford certain things," one teacher said quietly, frowning, "why does your sister always seem to wear the same grimy outfit?" She had to answer questions she never deserved to hear, and each one shifted the room against her. Whispers followed her down hallways like a second shadow. People who used to smile now gave half smiles, small courtesy smiles that said, "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do." Her friends started to send half invitations, "Maybe next week," instead of "come over tomorrow." She would try to explain once or twice, voice steadying with practiced calm, but the explanations lost weight like a plant without sun. I kept pushing. I contradicted her in front of people, said things that made her pause, and then watched as others filled the gap with assumptions that always ran in my favor. At home, I made my silence louder than anything I said. When she asked for help with a project, I pretended not to hear. When she tried to hug me in the kitchen in front of Mom and Dad, I stepped back like we were strangers and watched her shoulders slump like a curtain closing. Dinner conversations turned thin and awkward because I refused to be part of them. I watched her carry the weight of every awkward silence and blame, and it kept me going because she looked like she'd cracked under pressure. All built until one Sunday night when the house felt too small for the storms we'd made. Rosie's sister found me in the hallway outside my room, mascara streaking dark lines down her cheeks, hair messy like she'd been pulling at it all evening. She grabbed my sleeve with shaking fingers and she looked like someone scraping for a lifeline. "Please," she said, "please stop. I'll do anything, just stop." Her voice was thin and raw, the kind that makes the pit of your stomach twist even if you don't want it to. I could see the pleading in her eyes and the way she counted possibilities like offerings. She promised everything. "I'll change my look," she said, voice trembling. "I'll stop hanging out with certain people. I'll apologize to everyone. She kept listing things like bribes as if buying peace could erase months of humiliation. Her words came out in a jumble. She was begging, bargaining with the language of someone who'd been stripped down to what mattered most. Mom and Dad would be waiting in the living room with tired faces and questions she didn't want, and I could feel the shape of the household tilting under the weight of her pleas. When she finished, the air between us felt thin and brittle, like paper you could tear with a breath. I smiled, small and cold, because I wanted her to know I'd won the moment she promised anything. But I wasn't done. I set terms, laid them out like a contract I expected her to sign with no pencil surprise. "You'll admit you were wrong," I said, bullet plain and waiting. "You'll say you treated me unfairly. You'll copy me for a month." I meant everything I said. I wanted her to feel my life the way I had lived in the shadow of hers. She looked at me like someone watching a slow train approach, hope and dread crowbarred together. "Anything," she repeated, voice cracking again, desperate enough to swallow the word like a bitter pill. I told her the specifics. Black hair, the old band tee I wore, ripped jeans, the cafeteria seat in the corner, the music at 5:30, the failing grades acted and real, the fake social posts. I wanted her to mirror my worst days exactly. To step into the shoes she'd always compared me to and find out how they hurt when you walk. When I finished, there was a silence so thick it hummed. She nodded slowly like a person agreeing to an experiment you didn't get to opt out of. Fine, she said, and it sounded small and dangerous at the same time. The terms once spoken felt like a trap that would sting both of us. I felt a pull in my chest that wanted release and another that ached because I'd pushed her there. But I didn't move. I watched her make the bargain and let the house breathe in a new kind of tense quiet we'd created together. I stood in the kitchen doorway while she arranged her friends at the lockers like someone staging a confession scene, watching her hands tremble as if the words were knives she had to swallow. I told her my first demand and she nodded, voice small, because she'd promised anything and I meant to make it count. You have to say it, I said, and she looked up at me with a face stripped bare of defense. Say you were wrong to call me a copycat. Before school, I walked with her to the lockers and waited while she gathered her group, the same girls who'd laughed the day she screamed at me. They clustered around like a jury and phones were already out, faces lit by screens. Rosie's sister breathed in like she was diving and then let the words come out jagged. I overreacted, she told them, voice cracking. I was wrong to call him a copycat. He has his own personality. Some of them recorded the whole thing, thumbs shaking as if they were nervous about what the camera might capture next. People murmured, a few looked surprised, like they'd been handed a fact that didn't fit their picture. One friend said, okay, like it was a scene being closed, and another whispered, are you serious? I watched the way her face went red and then pale all at once, the humiliation and the relief wrestling in her eyes. I felt an odd twist in my stomach as cameras pressed closer. I had wanted her to admit it, and now that she was saying it, the victory tasted different than I'd imagined. After she spoke, I made her post the same confession on her profile and tag everyone who'd seen the original meltdown, because words in the hall were temporary but words online have weight. She sat on her bed with fingers that trembled as she typed, watching me like I was the judge and she was waiting for the sentence. I'm sorry, she wrote publicly. I was wrong to call my brother a copycat. He has a personality of his own. Comments filled quickly. Confused questions, a few supportive lines, and a flood of concerned DMs asking if she was okay. People she'd thought were friends sent messages that read like therapy notes. Are you all right? Did something happen? I watched those messages trickle through her notifications like drops on a window, and I felt both satisfaction and a strange hollow because the truth had been dragged into public space. Her friends' reactions were fractured. Some accepted the apology and moved on, others kept a cautious distance. Why would you do that? One girl wrote in a direct message, the question soft as if she was worried for both of us. Rosie replied with small, clipped answers that sounded rehearsed and raw at the same time. Then I told her the second demand, the part of the bargain designed to force empathy through mimicry. You have to copy me for a month. I said it slow, like reading terms people sign without looking. She stared at me like I'd handed over a map to some place terrible. Everything, I said. Black hair, my shirt, ripped jeans, the music, the cafeteria seat, the failing grades, the posts. Her mouth moved, but the sound didn't come right away. It felt like listening to someone agree to jump off a cliff and then planning the fall. She went out and bought the cheapest black dye the corner store had, came back with a plastic bag clutched at her side like contraband. She sat at the kitchen table and washed out her old image like it was mud, fingers staining dark. When the dye dried, her hair looked flat and angry, the color clinging in patches. Then she dug out my old band shirt from the back of a drawer and pulled on ripped jeans like a costume she wasn't sure she fit. She walked out of her room looking like someone who'd had an identity breakdown, and I felt the sick thrill of success, and the sick pang of watching someone you hurt relearn how to be visible. At school, she sat in my usual corner of the cafeteria, shoulders hunched, wearing my shirt and not making a scene about it. People stared, a few laughed quietly. The social math had changed, followers and likes shifted, the rumor machine spun new angles. She posted the picture I made her post with the caption I'd coerced, a shaky attempt at my sarcasm dressed as acceptance. Her friends sent messages that were a mix of pity and confusion, wondering if this was performance or surrender. I kept watching the patterns change like a man tallying coins, counting the cost of the experiment I'd forced both of us to live. I took her usual spot in the middle of the crowd like it was a trophy I'd claimed, watching her sit alone at the cafeteria trash table with her tray pushed to the side, shoulders folded in on themselves. She looked smaller there, like someone trying to hide in plain sight, and people circled the center where I sat, laughing and talking around me like I was the sun. I felt the pull of it, the way power hums when you shift a room's story, and I kept my face blank so they could decide whatever narrative fit them. I made her stay up late on purpose, cranking my playlist until the thin walls hummed and the floor vibrated with bass that felt like an animal. I timed the noise to nights before tests when she studied, the kind of nights that demand sharp eyes and steady hands. I would shut it off before dawn as if I'd never been loud at all, and I watched her rub sleep out of her eyes the next morning, doing the math on less sleep and more fear. "You're not making this easy," she said once in a shaky voice when she caught me at the sink, mascara smudged, and I said nothing because silence was part of my language. By Friday, the plan found its mark. She fell asleep in class, head dropping slowly against the desk, and I felt a small cold satisfaction when I noticed the teacher glance toward the back with annoyance. Later, during an important exam, she passed out cold on the table, chin to chest, and drooled on the paper. Papers fell quiet in a room used to the scratch of pens, and the look on the proctor's face turned into a clipped line like a judge writing 0 across a life. That 0 wiped out half her grade in the class like a clean slap. I watched the moment expand, like watching a bruise bloom under pale skin. Rumors started to spread faster than I expected. People wondered if I'd poisoned her food or burned her wardrobe with some kind of malicious ritual. "Did he do something to her?" a girl whispered over my shoulder once, as if the spectacle needed a villain and I fit the shape. The gossip fed itself, inventing details to fill holes. Jason, boy she liked, gave her a sideways look in the hall, like he was measuring how much of her he could still hold. Students traded theories like baseball cards, each rumor brighter and meaner than the last. I fed the fire by refusing to correct them, by letting the silence sit like oil on water. It all came to a head at Sunday dinner, where the family sat and pretended nothing had been a war. Rosie's sister couldn't hold it anymore. She started to cry, thin gasps at first, and then the kind of sobbing that pulls at the jaw and leaves a person raw. She told Mom, Mother, and Dad, Father, everything, voice breaking as she spilled out the nights I'd kept her awake, the way I'd sabotaged her exams, the public scenes I'd staged to make her look unstable. The house exploded with shouting like someone lit a fuse under the living room. Mom's voice rose sharp and then cracked. Dad's face went hard, and for a few minutes the walls swallowed the words and threw them back at us all. Then the shouting stopped like a door slamming, and a cold, stunned silence hit the room that was worse than noise. We sat under it like hosts at a funeral table, each of us suddenly smaller and louder in our own heads. I could see Mom on the couch, hands pressed to her mouth, and Dad pacing like he was trying to circumnavigate a sudden truth. "This is not normal," he said finally, as if defining it might keep it from spreading. The word normal landed in the room with weight, like a verdict we hadn't voted on. That night at midnight, Mom came to my door and asked me to tell everything. She sat on the edge of my bed and put her hand on my shoulder like she was steadying herself as well as me. "Tell me why," she said quietly, not angry but tired in a way that frightened me more than any shout. I told her all of it, the locker scream, the black dye, the failing tests I'd handed in blank, the music at 5:30, the cake, the posts, everything. My voice sounded small in the dark, like I was confessing to someone I had always wanted to impress. She listened, and the only sound was the house settling around us. "This stops," she said finally, and there was a new kind of resolve in her voice that made my chest go hollow. The next morning, Dad stood at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad in front of him, pen tapping like a gavel. He read rules aloud, each one clipped and exact. No more secret deals, mandatory family therapy, immediate return to normal behavior, and a list of consequences written like cold instructions. I watched him read them and felt the air change, the house moving from chaos toward something that looked like order. The rules landed between us like a net, and for the first time in months I could see both of us inside it, exposed and waiting to see how long we would last. We did the work because the house would not hold the silence anymore, and the rules felt like the only map out of the mess. Therapy started with Mom, Mother, Dad, Father, Rosie's sister, and me in the same room, 4 chairs arranged like an interrogation but softer. We wrote down what each of us heard growing up, and the therapist asked questions that made us flinch. At first we circled the blame like animals at a new scent, but week by week the story opened up and we saw how words like always and "you're just like" had sharpened into tools. It was ugly and slow and honest in ways nobody wanted, and I learned that being the problem had been a role handed to me before I even knew how to refuse it. School suspension felt like punishment at first, but it became time in which I had to think instead of perform. We wrote reflective essays for hours under fluorescent lights, putting down what drove us and what we feared. The essays were boring on the outside and heavy on the inside, a place where I had to admit small things that didn't feel small at all. Community service showed me other people's lives in quick glances. A cleanup crew that loved the rhythm of work, seniors who told me about their own stupid fights. I picked up trash and, in tiny steps, picked up pieces of a life that wasn't just about who I was next to Rosie. At home, the schedules felt like someone had drawn lanes on a highway where we used to collide. We had bathroom time slots, kitchen turns, and a strip of tape down the hall that marked who could pass when. It was ridiculous and oddly necessary because it stopped the little wars over space that always ended in louder fights. The tape became a joke after a week and then just a part of how we moved. The rules taught me to live with boundaries instead of against them, and boundaries taught us how to stop breaking each other without meaning to. During my forced alone hours, I wandered town and found the thrift camera like a small rescue. It cost a few dollars and smelled faintly of other people's hands. I carried it like contraband at first, pointing it at abandoned storefronts with flaking paint and playgrounds where swings hung like tired lungs. Shooting those places turned into a refuge. The clicks felt honest, small acts that could not hurt anyone. I learned to see composition instead of conflict, light instead of insult. The camera taught me to look rather than react, and that helped slow the part of me that loved the loud answer. Rosie surprised everyone in a way that felt like sunlight through a cracked window. She joined drama club, a decision I didn't see coming, and on stage she looked free in a way she never had been at home. The stage gave her a space to borrow voices and moods that weren't about our history, and people clapped for her for things that weren't tied to me. I watched from the back once and felt something like relief and shame tangled together. She moved differently under the lights, like a person trying on new skin, and the applause did what no argument ever could. It showed she could be seen without being compared. Therapy slowly untangled blame and parenting patterns. Mom and Dad admitted they'd labeled us early, saying things they thought were harmless, sweet this, free spirit that, and how those labels dug trenches between us. They cried in the therapist's office, and for once I saw them as people who had also been trying not to break. The admissions didn't erase months of hurt, but they made the house less a courtroom and more a workshop where things could be fixed. We learned tools. Stop phrases that meant shut down, check-ins that didn't force explanations, and consequences that were fair instead of performative. I wrote an honest apology and left it on her pillow like a small surrender. The paper was simple and my handwriting was messy, but the words were clear. I was sorry, I did it on purpose, I hurt you, I will stop. I put it there at midnight and imagined her reading it under the yellow lamplight. She accepted it later with a single nod and a quiet thank you, but she said trust would take a long time. That was fair, and I meant it when I told her I understood. We shook hands awkwardly once in the kitchen like two people agreeing to play a different game. After that, we began communicating with a whiteboard in the hallway for practical needs rather than feelings. Bathroom times, dinner rotations, who needed the car. It sounds small, but the board stopped late-night battles and whispered schedules from becoming explosions. It taught us how to ask for things without weaponizing them. We were not friends, not again, but we were learning coexistence. A brittle truce that felt like room to breathe. Little by little, the house changed from a stage for performances into a place where two people could live separate lives under the same roof and maybe, in time, be whole on their own. Months later, the scars were still there, visible in quiet looks and in the way we arranged our lives, but the war had cooled into a weird, steady thing, parallel living that kept us safe and sane. I woke up to a house that no longer trembled with midnight music and staged meltdowns. The tape down the hall stayed for a while longer because habits die slow, but the yelling stopped and conversations at the table got shorter and less explosive. The edges of our fights dulled. I could breathe without always checking if my next breath would start another fight, and that alone felt like space for something new. The school turned our mess into a lesson. I hated the irony, but the guidance counselor asked to use our story in an anti-bullying program, and some teachers referenced us when they taught about boundaries. Students watched the presentation and asked awkward questions, and I sat in the back once and felt raw seeing my face in a slide while a teacher explained why comparing siblings is dangerous. It was humiliating and useful at the same time. The clips of that week kept the memory alive, but the lessons helped other kids think about how small words become weapons. Social life changed for both of us in ways that didn't surprise me. Some friends never came back, and I lost people who liked the spectacle more than the person. Rosie's sister lost a few followers and a couple of pals, but she found new ones through drama club who liked her for what she did on stage, not because of our family story. She started to look healthier, like sleep actually agreed with her again. I lost my crowd too, the ones who cheered for me because I stirred trouble. But in their place came quieter people who liked photos and long walks, people who didn't need drama to prove anything. We moved forward in practical ways that mattered. Rosie got into her dream college, a place she'd talked about since middle school, and Mom and Dad cried and then packed boxes with a kind of careful joy that still had a scar in it. I didn't go right away. I chose a gap year to figure out who I was without defining myself in relation to her. That choice felt like a grown-up small rebellion, not the petty kind I used to enjoy. I wanted time to learn things on my own terms, to see what made me me when I wasn't performing against someone else. During my gap year, I kept photographing, and the camera became more than a refuge. It became a job of sorts for my looking. I shot abandoned storefronts, quiet streets at blue hour, and small town details people walked by without seeing. I started selling prints at a farmer's market and making enough cash to buy better film and a used lens. Photography taught me to notice light and composition and patience. It taught me how to hold a moment instead of forcing one. And slowly, the thing I'd used as an escape became a craft that shaped a future. At Rosie's graduation party, I offered to take photos because it felt right to mark that day with something honest. I brought my camera and stood at the edge of the crowd, taking grad shots where she smiled without the shadow of comparison. I saw her through the lens in a new, gentler light, and the photos turned out like proof that she was real and separate. Laughter lines, the way her hand found a friend's shoulder, the way she looked at mom when she cried. I sat on a lawn chair with a film roll in my pocket and watched our parents move between laughter and a quiet relief, as if something heavy had been lifted. We never braided each other's hair again, and that felt both sad and okay. The small rituals that used to mean closeness were gone, but the vicious cycles were gone too. We weren't enemies, we were two people learning to be separate and respectful. We learned that identity isn't built by copying or by opposing someone else. It comes from the tiny decisions you make when no one is watching, the habits you keep because they fit you, not because they push someone else into shadow. Sometimes I still see scars in a glance or in a snapped sentence, and sometimes Rosie's laugh hits a note that tells me she's still mending. But the house settled into a rhythm that didn't demand performance. We put up rules that turned into habits, and those habits turned into safety. The hard lessons cost us friendships and months of peace, but they forced a reckoning with labels and comparisons that had shaped us. In the end, we didn't become friends in the way we once were, but we grew into independent people, and that felt like peace enough for now. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. And drop a comment below, I'd love to hear your thoughts.